Hello, everybody. How are you today? This is Susan Smolhowski. I'm the executive director of the Film Society of Minneapolis-St. Paul, which is the producer and presenter of the annual Minneapolis-St. Paul International Film Festival. And I'm coming to you from my living room. I'm so sorry to say that we couldn't quite figure out how to do this, all of us together in one room, but we'll be back for conversations in person next year. In the meantime, I wanted to thank you for joining us for this final live conversation on the final day of this year's Minneapolis-St. Paul International Film Festival. It's our 40th iteration. And there was a moment there, a brief moment where we thought we might not make it to number 40. But we did, and as I've said, we're alive and kicking, and we are so happy to have with us today the After Antarctica team, who refer to themselves, I'm just going to say it, as the Three Musketeers. That is Tasha van Zandt and Sebastian Zeck, who are the filmmakers who made this incredible film, and Will Steger, the legendary Will Steger, who is the subject of the film, which was our closing night, our official closing night film last night at a drive-in on the banks of the Mississippi River in this incredible weather that we were given last night. We had really a glorious evening, sold out. And I just wanted to let you know that if you have not yet seen the film, and we're trying to see it on our platform earlier today, we are announcing that we are extending the views that are available for our Best of Fest, which runs through next Thursday. And if you go to our site after this conversation and want to see the film, it will once again be available to you. And I have to say that I highly recommend this film. As I was saying, it is about Will Steger. It is also, of course, about the impact of climate change on us as human beings. It's also about humanity and nature, but it's about soul and spirit and friendship and all of the things that I think are so important to us as human beings. So I encourage you to watch the film if you haven't seen it. And I know that you're going to have a wonderful time in conversation with the Three Musketeers, a conversation that's going to be led by Nicole, who is the Executive Director of Climate Generation, a Will Steger Legacy. So thank you again for being with us. And I hand it over to Nicole, and I will see you at the end of our hour of conversation.
Great. Thank you, Susan and Jesse and the Minneapolis-St. Paul Film Society and the International Film Festival for their partnership with today's conversation. As Susan mentioned, I'm Nicole, the Executive Director at Climate Generation, a Will Steger Legacy, which was established by Polar Explorer Will Steger in 2006 to accelerate climate change solutions through education and action. We were founded on the power of story and personal narrative. And today we have a real wonderful chance to dig into Will's life as an explorer, his eyewitness to climate change experience, and how this major expedition nearly 30 years ago changed his life. I'd like to welcome Tasha van Zandt, director, cinematographer, photojournalist, and producer who's traveled around the world and won numerous international awards. After Antarctica is her debut feature documentary. Joining her, Sebastian Zeck, also a documentary filmmaker and photographer with a focus on conservation and stewardship. He's produced and shot for clients such as Google and Time, and has worked in Southeast Asia, the Canadian Arctic, Antarctica, and more. And of course, also joining us today is Minnesota's own polar explorer, educator, and eyewitness to climate change, Will Steger. Will has accomplished some of the most significant polar expeditions in history. He led the first confirmed dog sled journey to the North Pole without resupply in 1986, the 1,600-mile south-north traverse of Greenland in 1988, which was the longest unsupported dog sled expedition history at that time. And he led the first dog sled traverse of Antarctica in 89-90, the historic 7-month International TransAntarctica expedition that's featured in this film. Will joined Amelia Earhart, Robert Peary, and Roald Amundsen in receiving the National Geographic Society's prestigious John Oliver Lagorce Medal for accomplishments in geographic exploration in the sciences and public service to advance international understanding in 1995. This was the first and only time the Society presented these three categories together, and Will's gone on to win numerous other awards from the Society and other organizations since. So today we're going to dig into a conversation about the film After Antarctica, and you're also going to get a behind the scenes view of the story. So I'm going to start, Tasha and Sebastian, our filmmakers, with my first question, which is, what is the story that you wanted to tell with this film?
Well, we're so happy to be here, and it's such an honor to be able to share the film with the festival. You know, we both grew up in Minnesota, and growing up here, Will was such a hometown hero and a local legend to so many of us. And I remember reading about his expeditions and the way that he used his platform as a tool to bring awareness to our polar regions. And that had a huge impact on me. And so over the years after meeting Will, and really speaking together about being able to share his story, we really learned so much more about the TransAntarctica expedition and the way that it was so resonant to the present moment and today as well. And through that journey, really realized that across both poles, Will's path has led him to being an eyewitness to the greatest changes in the polar regions of our planet. And we really wanted to bring that to life and Will's eyewitness story to life through this film.
Yeah, I'll also add that the first time I met Will was up at his homestead in Ely, and I was just awestruck at the life that he had built for himself up there and for the community. And one of the first things that really inspired me was how in his way of living so intentionally and with such a strong purpose. And that was really the thing that drew me into helping to tell Will's story.
Great. Will, this next question, the film really showcases your journey as an explorer and many expeditions throughout your life. Why have you chosen a life of expeditions and exploration?
Well, I'm a curious person, and for me, exploring is about curiosity. I was fortunate as a young kid. I was given freedom by my parents, and I ran with that freedom. And I was raised in such a way that I didn't see boundaries, and I didn't see barriers. So, exploration fit me perfectly because of the challenge and I always wanted to see what was around the next bend. And I also love the wilderness. I like that type of life, the simple life of traveling in the wilderness. I think many of us have in canoe trips and so forth. I've carried it to a real extreme, but it's such a beautiful life. And I made my whole life around that, and also my story and education around the wilderness and preserving the wilderness that I have experienced.
Great. You know, Tasha and Sebastian, I definitely feel, having seen the film, that as much as you draw on the character development of the International TransAntarctica Expedition Team, Antarctica is also a character. Why Antarctica?
Well, that's a great question. I think for us in getting to know Will and his eyewitness story and the changes that have taken place, something that really impacted us personally was Will's personal connection to these places and learning of the adventures and the moments and the teamwork that took place, and now for parts of that route to no longer exist, just really connected and resonated with us in a new way when we had that adventure story and personality of Antarctica to really put to this place. And so I think, in learning about telling stories about the climate crisis now, we really wanted to focus in on that. Hopefully the more personal the story, the more personally people can connect to the message of what has been lost, but also the steps that we can take to really create change.
Mm-hmm. And I love that question about Antarctica as a character, because that was something very intentional throughout our process of editing, was how do we give this continent and also the Arctic, which is in many ways a completely different place, as Will describes in the film, how do we give them two distinct personalities? So Antarctica, you know, through music and through sound design. We gave the continent its own flavor. And then, as you'll see in the film, the Arctic has its own kind of character as well.
Yeah, you have beautiful aerial drone shots of the Arctic that gives you a sense of the desolateness, but beauty. Will, when you knew that this film would really focus on TransAntarctica, an expedition that took place nearly 30 years ago, what was the main message you wanted people to know who might not have followed that expedition? What do you want them to know about the impact this expedition had?
Well, the purpose behind the expedition, I mean, the expedition drew the attention to the continent. Our goal was to make Antarctica famous because at that time, the Antarctic Treaty was up for review in 1990. And when I met John Louis in 1986 on the way to the pole, on the middle of the Arctic Ocean, when we conceived this trip, the Antarctica was going to be opened up for mineral exploration. And the 27 treaty nations had signed a document to do that. So our goal was to draw attention to Antarctica, to the need to preserve Antarctica rather than opening it up for mineral exploration. And we achieved our purpose basically through international cooperation. We got all the countries cooperating. The Soviet Union, which we were in the Cold War with, was basically our partner. We had a joint venture with the Soviets. In order to cross Antarctica, we needed the Soviet logistics on the eastern side. The 2,000 miles around there was their area of study. And but everyone, all the countries came together. And I hope today the Antarctica expedition can stand out for the power of cooperation. And this is the cooperation of all cultures, all people. We always looked at ourselves as one person, one people. And it was really something to be part of that back then, to see all the countries coming together during the Cold War era. So that, and the hope of peace on Earth, you know, the power of cooperation, and the changing climate, I think, is our present struggle that we are facing as a globe, and something that an issue I think we can all get together, and that I hope will bring some peace also back to the world.
Yeah, I think that's a very salient message for today, 30 years later,
Yep.
When we look at this global crisis and what's required, especially as the US rejoins the Paris Climate Agreement this year, and the global community gets together this November in Glasgow to figure out how to address this issue and ratchet up their solutions. That's really powerful. Tasha and Sebastian, just thinking about what it must have been like to film in these really remote places, what were some of the challenges in making this film, both maybe on site and outside of what people might not know what goes into making a film?
Yeah, I mean, for the production itself, we largely worked as a two-person team. Tasha and myself both, you know, we're both cinematographers, so we traded off with the camera, and you know, we did all of the sound recording ourselves. So that in itself was a challenge, but also allowed us to be quite nimble in our production and be able to, you know, film Will in these more remote locations and more intimate settings. But yeah, I mean, filming in the Arctic, the biggest challenge there is just not having access to any supplementary gear that we may need. So everything has to be planned out very, very carefully in pre-production. All of the logistics, everything has to be planned out beforehand, because if something were to happen out in the field, there's no option for replacement. So that, I think that's one of the biggest challenges of the extreme remote locations.
Mm-hmm.
Tasha, anything else you want to add from your perspective, or does that cover it all, you think?
Oh, I mean, that's so well said, because that really was the biggest challenge, was just filming in remote locations and all of the pre-production and planning. And, you know, we really feel like in so many ways documentary filmmaking is an expedition of its own, and the making of this film was such an expedition of its own. And so there was also a lot that we learned from Will about that we could really apply to our pre-production process and in really planning and preparing for this. But yeah, I think a lot of the work went into just preparing as much as possible so that once we were in the field, we could really just focus and document the best we could.
So one thing that I really thought you did masterfully, for those viewers that don't know, I've had the privilege of working with Will for the last 15 years through running Climate Generation. And I love how you go back and forth between 89, 90, Will in his 30s and Will present day on his solo expeditions that he's been taking for the last 5 years or so. Will, this question's for you. As you think about those major expeditions you've done and these solo trips more recently, what's different about these expeditions and what is similar? Yeah,
Good question. One of the biggest privileges in my life was leading international expeditions teams for over a 25-year period, and that was just a wonderful experience. My perspective of life and cultures, and literally living at very close quarters and under a lot of hardship with people from different cultures. It was very encouraging. And just working with the team itself, with a team of dogs, crossing Antarctica or the Arctic Ocean was a challenge. And then also, of course, behind the scenes of raising the money in the organization was another challenge and another wonderful experience. I also traveled a lot with just one team member, which I think is the easiest way to travel, because you normally, especially when I was younger, you find a person, and I think a lot of us do, is we find the person that you really fit with, and you become partners and you travel a lot. You know each other's quirks and so forth. There's no hassles. Everybody knows what to do. I consider that probably maybe the safest and easiest way to travel, although there is safety in numbers in a group. Whereas the solo is a totally different experience. You're alone, and I purposely try. For example, my solos I've been traveling on in the last 7 years. I've chose to travel on rivers when they break up, starting in the cold winter, and then ideally coming off when everything's open up, and going through that whole transition of incredible, dangerous area where you have to be in total in the moment all the time. And then being in the moment is just an incredible, beautiful, beautiful experience. You experience everything that's around you intuitively. I do very little thinking in my own mind. I'm just there in the present. When I have to, I use my mind, but I'm not daydreaming. In fact, if you're daydreaming, you'll get a sort of a slap in the face real easy with a slip or a fall or in the ice. Also, the solo is extremely simple. This is why I do it. I don't have the time I used to when I was younger. I have a couple of nonprofits, Climate Gen and Steger Wilderness Center, that I'm responsible for, and among other things. So I can't afford to take a year or two off to plan another expedition. Whereas on a solo, in my spare time, it gives me something to do when I'm fundraising and so forth, just plan out everything. And it's so simple. It's such a simple life, because you arrive with a total of maybe 200 pounds of gear plus your canoe, and that'll let you can travel for 2 months on just that alone. So the simplicity of it, you're not flying in over across the world, 30 dog teams and the logistics and hundreds of thousands of dollars. You can travel very lightly. So they're all different experiences. The solo is extremely intimate. And I mentioned in the film, I do need this alone time during my life right now, because I am so committed in my public life, in the city and everything I do. And I need the city life too. I also need the society and the purposeful living of a purposeful life of running 2 nonprofits or being part of 2 nonprofits. And thanks to you, Nicole, the Climate Change is running very well, and I'm focusing more on the Steger Center. But so they're all different experiences, and I just want to thank Natasha and Sebastian. I think they really caught the solo really well, because if you watch this film, there's a lot of silence and a lot of just quietness, and it's really where it's at. You're right in that moment all the time. It's a beautiful space to be in.
Great. Thanks, Will, for sharing a little bit about your perspective from these two very different types of traveling in these remote regions. For our audience that's viewing this webinar from home, please feel free to type in questions in the Q&A. I'm scanning them, and I'm going to pivot to one of the questions that was posted in the Q&A, because I've watched Tasha and Sebastian deal with years and years of archival material and expedition and try to figure out what was the story they wanted to tell. And so I thought this question was spot on. How did the film change over the course of planning and writing and gathering footage? What do you wish you could have included that maybe didn't make the cut?
Oh, that's a great question. So many things. I think, Will has lived so many incredible lives and has done so many incredible journeys. And one of the biggest challenges was just really finding that anchor and the thread through the editing process to lock into the story that we have now. But there are so many other expeditions and moments and stories that Will has lived that we wish we could have included in this film. And hopefully can find, Will can find other ways to share those very soon, because there's so many things that Will has done. But what do you think, Sebastian? Can you think of anything specifically?
Not sure specifically, but yeah, I mean, with documentary filmmaking, much of the story is crafted in the edit. So as we were in production, we were conceptualizing and starting to structure the story. But once we got into the edit, that's when we really sat down and said, okay, these are the elements, and these are the story beats, and this is how it's going to be structured. So there are inevitably things that end up on the cutting room floor that we wished we would have been able to include in the film, but we're so happy with where we ended up.
Wonderful. I would agree. I think the audience who's seen it would probably also agree. Well, going back to what we were talking about earlier with the TransAntarctica expedition and the power of teamwork and a common goal, I'm curious, how did this not only guide that expedition, but other aspects of your life following? You've very much lived a life with many different teams, and also always having a common goal driving you. Could you speak to a little bit about how that was important then and has driven your life since?
Yes, the TransAntarctica expedition, especially the international aspects of it and the political work that we did over a 4-year period, just opened up a world of possibilities for me, not just in myself, but just my surroundings. I saw, I was so inspired by that. It was the impetus of forming the Steger Wilderness Center, which was a vision of mine many years ago, but I saw the possibilities there that, yes, I could actually do that. I could draw an international community to Ely, Minnesota someday. So it opened that up, and it just gave me hope, hope for the planet. But it motivated me to just keep working. I should add that the internet was not really on board during 89, 90. We had what was called the Apple link, which is a small little link, Prodigy systems, but there was not a mass communication. But what was looming, which I knew in 87 when I met Al Gore, the internet was going to come on in 91, 92. And that's what really was the thing that really changed my life. Because I was established now internationally in education and expeditions, I was able through the internet and the expeditions to bring into real time these remote areas into the classroom. Our students were actually able to track individual bears by satellite colors and be part of an interesting experiment to figure out if the polar bears in Canada were international or just national bears, because if they're international bears, they'd be protected by international law. So they had these bears that were migrating back and forth that they were tracking from Greenland and Canada. So it opened up all sorts of studies, and that I've been actually still involved in internet studies, but I was able to do programs I developed at the University of St. Thomas and Hamline University, online programs that are still alive today and doing quite well.
True. Tasha and Sebastian, why anchor this film with TransAntarctica?
Well, for us, the more that we got to know Will, I remember Will telling us how TransAntarctica had the greatest impact on his life, and in so many ways led you to where you are today, and really was that pivotal point. And so I think right from when we first started thinking about the story, we knew we really wanted to explore that theme of hindsight and looking back, also as hopefully inspiration to us all as to where we are right now, looking into the future. What steps can we make, and what impact can we have in our own lives so that we can best take steps around the changes that could come.
That's
Yeah, and
perfect.
I'll also just add the archival footage from that expedition is so remarkable, and I just want to spotlight the work that the team that was along on the expedition did. And it's such a remarkable expedition, and like Tasha said, it was such a pivotal expedition in Will's life.
Will, let's talk about how this was a pivotal moment. We know that you talk about how you're an eyewitness to climate change. None of your expeditions could be replicated today. We've lost many, many ice shelves, both in the Arctic and Antarctica. Can you speak to that call to action you had when you learned that the Larsen ice shelf in Antarctica disintegrated in 98 and 2002, and what that did for you?
You know, I taught climate change in my classroom in the late 60s, and as a kid, I've always kept weather records. So I was always very much aware of the changing climate. I saw the first signals coming in the 80s. So it wasn't when the Larsen ice shelf broke up in 2002, it wasn't a bandwagon I jumped on. There wasn't any bandwagon at that time. But when the Larsen, the size of a huge size of almost Alaska, the Larsen ice shelves, when that broke up, it was I knew the time had come, that the climate it caught all the scientists, everybody off guard. But unfortunately, it was just a very few small numbers of people. The rest of the world was going on as usual, and I realized that this time has come. I was going to pack my bags in Ely, Minnesota, and about 9 months later, I moved down to the city to help start the climate movement. And I formed an organization at that time called the Will Steger Foundation, which we incorporated later into the Climate Gen. And that was the organization that I built up in order to work through climate policy, education, and so forth. But ironically, at the beginning of the film festival here last week, probably 4 or 5 days ago, we just had the largest iceberg ever break off of the continent of Antarctica, the size of Rhode Island, not Rhode Island, Long Island, which is even bigger. And what's interesting about this breakup is it's much further south. In other words, it's much more towards the interior in the colder area, which was once a colder area. So Antarctica continues to shed ice, and the continent, so this is the reality we're facing. On the other hand, I look at the new administration getting back into the Paris Accord. There's a lot of great things happening. We are going to have to adapt what's going to be dealt out to us. There's no question about that. But if you look at the progress we've made just in Minnesota in clean energy, we're creating tens of thousands of jobs. We're, I'm not sure, 27% or 28% of electricity. So there's a lot of successes here, but we as a society and we as small communities have to really stick to this issue. And it's not just climate change, it's climate justice too, because there's other people that didn't have the abilities to avoid climate and pollution by choosing another place to live. But it's really a climate justice, and it's a moral imperative because we're looking at mass extinction right now. So it's a good enough reason to really get motivated. And but you know, I always saw that solutions are social engagement, and I think we saw that. What was interesting at the film last night, I mean, I just we had 200 people there, 50 cars, but the masks were off for the first time, and I looked at it as historical because it was, I wouldn't say at the end of the it's our coming out, maybe for now at least, socially. And the good cheer and the hugs. I never thought I'd be hugging anyone for another year or so, but it was that way. And that's the social engagement I'm talking about. It's that, you know, we as a community working together and being one as a community, one of all cultures, that we can overcome, you know, almost anything that way. But we have to cooperate, and we all have to be together on this.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. When we think about solutions to climate change, social engagement, people sharing their personal experience with climate change and their personal story. Tasha and Sebastian, when you think about film and arts, what role do you hope that this film has when it, as it relates to climate change, and what role can artists and other cultural leaders play in inspiring action on climate change from your perspective?
Well, I completely believe that the stories we tell can expand worldviews and unite us together, and create so much connection. And so I hope that this film can really inspire people to look at how they as individuals can take steps to unite other people together around a collective goal around the climate crisis. But yeah, what about you, Sebastian?
Yeah, I love what you said about climate storytelling, because in a way, this is Will's climate story. This film is Will's climate story, and that was, you know, very intentional, and that's, you know, that's what we set out to do. So encouraging other peoples to share their climate stories as well, which is, you know, something that Climate Generation does so well.
And you know, for Will, his life has led him to being an eyewitness, but as he shares in the film, we're all eyewitnesses now, and there are steps that each of us can take to create change and impact. So hopefully this can inspire people who see it to feel empowered to do so.
Yeah, I'm mindful for those viewers that didn't quite get it watching the film, that Antarctica had a role to play with Will's current legacy and present mission. You know, his drawing of the Steger Center in a tent in Antarctica that, you know, at the end in the credits, you see the international team have their reunion in 2010 and get to see it for the first time in real life. And then obviously the disintegration of the Larsen ice shelf that took the expedition team a month to cross, being a real impetus for Will to say, I need to move out of my home in Ely, building the center to really take action on climate change. So this question is for both Tasha and Sebastian and Will. Since both of these organizations and this mission that's really present for Will today, what did you hope to show with bringing that present mission into focus with his organizations and the legacy now?
Yeah, well, for us with the film, exactly what you said to Nicole is that was such a big part of the story for us, is that with the TransAntarctica expedition leading you to where you are today, Will, it really was the pivot point that led to Climate Generation and your work with the Steger Center. And so we hope that people can also see the power in perseverance and in following your dreams. I mean, from Will drawing out the plans for the Steger Center to now seeing it and seeing that drawing on his wall and looking out the window and seeing it built exactly the same. It's just transformative to see what we can really do when we set ourselves to a goal and then follow that North Star.
Yeah, and also the hindsight on the TransAntarctica expedition we thought was so remarkable, because the breaking or the disintegration of the Larsen ice shelf in 2002 really reframed the expedition itself and the impact of the expedition, because of course you set out to you know, encourage the United States and all nations to come together around the Antarctic Treaty, which was a success, but then only 12 years later the Larsen breaks off, which completely reframed the expedition, which is so remarkable.
Yeah, Will, when you think about your ultimate legacy and these two organizations and having this connection back to Antarctica, what do you hope your ultimate legacy is? How do you want people to respond when you think about this moment? And
I really think we all should have our own legacies, to have the courage to live an example of your life or teach through your example. I think it's important to, what do we all want to leave behind? I mean, I think, I've always had a good vision and a good purpose, and my life has been so rich because of that purpose. But I think we all should look at what kind of models do we want to leave behind, and live a life accordingly, and for the rest of the life, and for the innocence of the animals and plants that we really want to preserve. And in terms of my legacy, I mean, I look at it more as a spirit. It's not necessary to have a name on anything when you're passed away, but it's important. I think it's been important for me to create a spirit, or be part of a spirit, because we're always a part of the spirit, or something that spirit will carry on, and carry on for the goodness of the planet, and of the life, and of God's creation around us. And but it takes I think it takes courage to do it, because you've got, if you're going to live by an example, you've got to walk your talk, and that's not always easy to do. But I think it's important that we all do that, and just live our lives accordingly. And I don't know, leadership to me is really about humility, and being inclusive, including everything. And that's everyone being inclusive, not just some people being inclusive and other people aren't. It's an inclusiveness, which is so important today. And fortunately, it's really a very important thing today in our society. We're finally facing up to equality, inclusiveness,
right.
the humility that brings along with it.
Right. Well, when you speak to the spiritual side, I'm struck, Tasha and Sebastian, you did such a wonderful job digging into this other side of Will that most people don't get to see. And that's Will's more vulnerable side, and the really tough times that you've had over your life, Will, personally, where going on these expeditions is, a chance for you to like reground and find yourself when you're struggling. And there's this moment, Will, where you're about to leave. I think it's for one of your solos, and you actually talk about how you're aware that you might not return. And the prospect of going off on these expeditions, and that maybe being a possibility, kind of is exciting and exhilarating. And to some people that might freak them out hearing that. Can you speak a little more to what you mean when, you're going on these expeditions knowing that is a potential reality?
Well, I've been fortunate in my life through expeditions, and also projects that I've taken on, of fighting what I would call my edge, where I have to be at my very best, or on an expedition stay, especially a solo. If I'm not at my best, I'm not going to be coming back. I have to be right in that moment, right on that edge, which is where the spiritual learning for me is. It's really what life is about, is being in the moment all the time. It's something that it's impossible to explain being in the moment with words and examples. But I think Natasha and Sebastian, I just have to hand it to them. You did such a good job, because at the beginning I say, I wish, my purpose of my life is to explain why. And it's the hardest thing. That's the thing I really wish I could write a book on the why, and then everyone would understand it. But the fact that you're even writing it is not, you're out of the moment when you're doing it. But the film, you somehow, I felt you did that in the film. I think it's there. And I just really thank you for it, because I don't have to answer it. You did it. You did it for me.
True. The viewers really get that.
So poetically and with such art. I mean, you guys are just, I've worked with a lot of film all my life, and a lot of it's embarrassing to me. It's the usual cliche stuff. And And I pretty much, we started on this project in 2017, and we call ourselves the Three Musketeers because we've lived together, and Natasha said we're closer than family. We spent all the holidays together. We spent so much time in the summer together, interviewing, and always in tight quarters. We traveled together, Antarctica expeditions, and I gave you full access to. That to me is a total trust, access to anything you want, and whatever questions, I'll answer them. And then 6 weeks ago, I saw the film for the first time. You rented the film, the little theater up in Ely, and went up and watched it alone. And I was really impressed. I watched a couple of times afterwards. I was actually more impressed when I started picking it apart. And how do you actually do this? And I really believe it. And I'm not taunting myself or you, but it's a really a piece of art. It's I don't watch a lot of movies. I love movies, but in documentaries, I pay attention to the documentaries and in the Arctic and adventure. But you were such a compliment to me. I really, from my heart, I thank you for it.
Natasha and Sebastian, I'm going to build on that for you to kind of respond to what Will's saying, incorporating his vulnerability and getting this unprecedented access and being able to take a film that really helps people understand, why does Will do what he does? Who is he? How does somebody accomplish what he does? Do you want to speak a little bit around, how you handled some of those more delicate conversations and chose to include them or maybe not include them? Would love to hear your reaction to some of this.
I think for us, one thing that I've been reflecting on a lot in this part of the process with the film is the idea of the journey, not the destination, is something you hear your whole life, but I feel like it's something that through Will, we finally fully have understood, is that Will, in your life, you have given so much attention to that present moment and to each step of the journey of the way that we live our lives. I remember you saying once to us that the way that someone lives their life is what art is to you. And I thought that was so beautifully said, and has really inspired us to look at our own lives of how are we building our lives? What does our path look like? And how can we use that to make impact? And, I think in our friendship and collaboration with Will over the years, when Will has shared hardships or challenges that he's faced, and then has shared the ways that he's overcome those challenges and the resilience and perseverance that he's had in the face of those challenges, it's completely transformed our own lives and has been such an inspiration to us personally. And we all face hardships in life, and we can't always control change, but through Will, we've learned that we can change our response. And that's something that Will has done time and time again, in his own life and in the climate crisis, is looking at ways to change his response. And so I think for us in telling Will's story, the way that moved us was so profound that we thought if we can bring this into the story, with this commentary on the climate crisis, but also this commentary on, like Will said earlier, what do we leave behind and what impact can we make on this planet as individuals? That was really a North Star for us in terms of the narrative of this film. And our hope was that people can respond and love Will the way that we have through getting to know him and his story, and feel inspired that no matter what hardships we face, there is always a chance to take another step forward. And it always leads to somewhere more beautiful and more powerful than you can ever imagine.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that was perfectly said. I don't really have anything to add, but I just want to say thank you to Will for trusting us with your story and for sharing, the hardships and the vulnerabilities, because it is something, like Tasha said, we all have hardships of one form or another, but it's the way that you approach these things and work through them that is really, like Tasha said, has completely changed our perspectives.
Nice. Well, it's really hard to ask this question, and I think consolidate a lot of the messages from the film, but what's the ultimate message that you want this film to have for you personally and professionally and for viewers?
I hope it's just beyond a film about me personally, but my hope is that people would see possibilities in the world, you know, not just in yourself, but in the world around you. And that you can do pretty much with a good heart, you know, goodness on your side, you can pretty much achieve, you know, you can achieve your dreams, and you're going to have to work for them sometimes. But I hope that people see the possibilities. And then the theme of Antarctica was all about cooperation, which is the theme of today. It's always the theme, cooperation, and the sense of we need cooperation now. I mean, I think it's missing a little bit socially right now. We're in a very volatile, rapidly changing social time, and it's way overdue. And so we're in the throngs of some big change right now. But I think we have to see the spirit of cooperation of all cultures, all races working together. That's how we're going to do it, and that includes everyone. You know, not leaving anyone behind anymore like this. And that's not the way. I don't think we can tolerate that anymore.
Right.
And then I think the film is about the power of the story, because we communicate through our stories. And I think storytelling is how human beings have always communicated. And if you ever notice, if you're communicating through stories from a person of a different culture than you break those barriers really quickly. All of a sudden, that's what I did in the tent all the time during Antarctica and the storms. Daho, I would love to hear his stories about how he lived, all his details, what his inside of his refrigerator looked like, and what he did in the office, all these details and stories. I felt I learned about the Chinese culture more than even if I traveled there as a tourist. I learned it through his stories, and we shared all of our stories during that expedition. So yeah, it's the power of the stories, but it's really seeing the possibilities in ourselves. That's it, because a documentary that is about a cool person and that's the usual thing. You have to have a take home where you take in that power of that film, and you see a possibility, or you have a take home that's something positive that you can do with your life, rather than admiring somebody or just having a great entertainment with a lot of shooting or whatever it is in entertainment. But so
yeah, I love the word possibility. We'll underscore that. Tasha and Sebastian, what is the takeaway you hope viewers have from this film? What would you love for them to do?
I think Will said that so perfectly, and I love what he said about possibility, because Will, your story has showed us so many possibilities in life, even in the making of this film. Earlier we said how documentary filmmaking can feel like such an expedition, but Will really showed us how to keep your eyes on that North Star and keep putting one foot in front of the other, and that when you do that, so many possibilities are open. And we hope that people can feel that inspiration from Will's story, and also from these expeditions that Will has done. And also really feel inspired that even in this year when we have all been so solitary and in our own homes or separated, there's still so much action that we can do as individuals to draw people together around collective action and around a common goal. And we can do that through our stories. And so I think there, like Will said too, there is a power to sharing our stories, and we're all these eyewitnesses now. We're all seeing changes. So I would just encourage people to see the film to really reflect on what's their own eyewitness story that they're noticing, and find ways to share that with their community. And also to get involved, you can go to afterantarctica.com/takeaction, and so many great resources with climate generation on climate-based storytelling, and how to start sharing our eyewitness stories.
Yeah, I mean, that was a perfect response. But to me, it is about the possibilities and the perseverance through hardship, and changing our response to those hardships, whether it be pandemic or climate change, or personal hardships in our relationships or in our work, or whatever it may be. Examining our responses to those things, and really, I take such inspiration from Will and in how you treat those things as an expedition. So that's my personal takeaway from the film.
So great. I'm monitoring the Q&A, and even though we could end on those powerful notes of reflection, I'm going to pivot to some of the questions that are in the Q&A now. One for you, Tasha and Sebastian, is a viewer wants to know about the filming process, whether or not you traveled with Will, what was archival, where were you traveling with Will to get film footage for this film. So if you could share a little bit around the logistics of what was archival versus where did you actually travel with him?
That's a great question. So in the film, when we're in 1989 to 1990, that's all archival footage. And that was filmed by an incredible film crew that dropped in at checkpoints along the way. You know, as Will said earlier, a large mission of that expedition was to draw world attention and media to the need to preserve and protect Antarctica. And so this footage was so pivotal for that. Will was able to share that with us, and we were able to draw from, I think we had around 36 hours of archival from that expedition alone that we had really went through and worked with in the edit. And additionally, in terms of the archival and the past story, you'll also notice that the audio, there's so many of Will's own personal audio recordings. And we went through those and really wanted the film to feel that when we're in the past, we're in the past, almost like a personal flashback or memory. And when we're in the present, it feels very present. And so for the present day footage, when you see Will on his solo journey today at his homestead, going to the Arctic or going to Antarctica towards the end, that was filmed by us as a two-person team primarily. You know, Sebastian said we're both cinematographers, but Sebastian's an incredible director of photography, and I did a lot of aerial cinematography. And so we really worked very closely together. Just, I think, you know, as Will talks about cooperation, we really lived that too in terms of the filmmaking process of just making that piece come together. But yeah, the present day filming was primarily the two of us, but then the archives, we were able to build upon so much great footage that Will had been able to share with us.
That's great. I think it's helpful for viewers to understand the amount of work that was involved, both in the archives and the present day footage. We might have time for one more question. Will, I'm going to ask this of you. This is a question I know you and I get all the time when we're doing public events on climate change. How do you remain hopeful when we see what's happening to our planet? So anything you can share for folks who are feeling a little bit of the despair, knowing what's at stake and what we're losing, and also the opportunity and possibility. What gives you hope?
Yeah, I have the utmost faith, but more than that, a belief in the power of the human spirit, because I've seen during the most dire situations you could imagine where the human spirit prevailed and cooperated and came out on top. And that's why the being cooperative, international cooperation, cultural cooperation, that's the key to the spirit. Because when we're working together on it, we're doing it. And even though things are going to be challenging or challenging at the time, and or we have to adapt or be resilient, whatever is in store for us, we can do that. We can overcome it. We can become better people in a better nation and a better humanity for it. So it's really it's the power of the human spirit that I hang on to, and I've been very fortunate in my life because I've seen it demonstrated many times where I came out on the other end, at least alive, where I actually saw the demonstration of that. And I've had a number of things where all I had left was my faith, and I saw the power of faith come true. So I'm an optimist. I'm a realist because I'm still here. I've always survived the expeditions, but I have a good attitude about life. I have an expedition attitude. That means a life of experience, and everything's an experience, and you face it, you accept it, you move forward, you learn from it, you have a great deal of joy and purpose in your life through all that. And that's because I'm continually working with other people, other organizations. That's really where it's at for us all, I believe.
Great. Before I turn it back to Susan, I just want to thank Will and Tasha and Sebastian for this conversation. And I want to encourage our viewers to check out After Antarctica through the MSP International Film Festival through Thursday with this extended viewing, and spread the word to your friends and family. And if you miss it, of course, we want you to watch it through the Minneapolis St. Paul Film Festival, but it will be making its round through other film festivals, Telluride and Boulder in Colorado. And stay tuned for supplemental resources that Climate Generation is going to be developing with the After Antarctica team to support this film as it continues to roll out. And for those of you locally wanting to get involved in climate change solutions, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention climategen.org as well as afterantarctica.com for ways to take action and share your climate story. So with that, I want to thank Will and Tasha and Sebastian and turn it back to Susan to close us out.
Thank you so much, Nicole.
Yeah.
For those of you who weren't with us at the beginning, I'm the executive director of the MSP Film Society and the Minneapolis St. Paul International Film Fest, which concludes today, but that's not the end of it because we have 4 more days of Best of Fest at mspfilm.org. So please, we have 50 of the 103 features showing, including, as Nicole just said, After Antarctica through the week. And as you can tell from this incredibly inspiring conversation, that it is a really inspirational film. And although it addresses these really vitally important global issues, it's also very personal. And it has many Minnesota connections also. The executive producers, Bill Polad and Sarah Pillsbury, are from here. Some of the supporters, Roger Hale and Nor Hall, are from here. Will Steger, of course, is from here, up north. And then Tasha is from Minneapolis, Sebastian from over there in St. Paul. And there's a little anecdote about Tasha that I love. In 2008, when I believe she was still in school here, she was working over at the little St. Anthony Main Theater, where if this were a normal year, we would have had the official closing night film last night. She was working over there the first year the festival was ever held at St. Anthony Main, selling popcorn or tickets or something. And so that, in a way, her experience with our festival inspired her in many ways to become a filmmaker. I think it's a wonderful full circle. And one of the questions that came up in the Q&A that Nicole didn't have time to get to is a question that is really important to me, and that is, what is the role of arts leaders and cultural leaders in climate action? And I would argue that not only in climate action issues, but also social action and so many important issues in our world, our role is to bring you films like these and conversations like these to open up your mind to something new. Our motto is, often is, always is now, come for the movie and stay for the conversation. So this is what our work is about, and it's very fundamentally important to me. So that said, again, Best of Fest for the next 4 days. Watch After Antarctica. Watch for it in the future because it will make waves, I think. And again, it was a total delight to hear you converse and talk with so much candor about this film, and to have you as our closing night, your film as our closing night event. So thank you so much, everyone here, and see you next time.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
very nice.
My pleasure knowing you all.
Very nice. Thank you.
Thank you.